My name's Rachel Lewett. I'm a trauma educator and ancestral healing practitioner and someone who talks a tremendous amount about the nervous system in the context of capitalism and colonialism and the impact that the systems of subjugation have on bodies over time. And so before I'd love to offer some practices that might be helpful during this time, and I realized that what I actually want to talk about even before that is why so many of us don't know these practices that are actually like just basic mammal shit, right? About like how to calm our nervous systems, how to self-regulate, and the connection between the fact that we don't often know these practices and the predicament that we find ourselves in right now. You know, many of us nowadays are talking about, polyvagal theory and nervous system regulation and all these things. But it is not as if science, Western science has suddenly discovered how our nervous systems are supposed to work. No. What's happening is that Western white science is finally having language for what our indigenous, and when I say our, I mean all of our indigenous lineages have known for millennia, most of the time we've been human on two legs on this planet. We have known these things. And there is a way, and what I want to talk about before I offer some practices, is the way in which capitalism and colonialism have interrupted what we have long known to be practices for regulating our nervous systems. And, it's a whole nother topic, a whole nother video to talk about cultural appropriation and why it is that so many of us, especially European heritage folks, have been so separated from our indigenous wovenness, our wisdom practices that our ancestors, way back ancestors had and practiced. Like, that's a whole nother topic. But what is true is that so many of us shy away, I think, especially white folks, shy away from seeking out spiritual practice, seeking out, ways of, enrolling ourselves into compassion and peace and connectedness, because we don't want to culturally appropriate, right? And what is interesting about the whole sort of nervous system revolution and this way that we have for talking about what calms our nervous systems is that we're actually uncovering what our ancestors have known for millennia about how to actually be with our bodies and how to calm, how to center, how to downregulate dominance, how to pick ourselves up when we're in collapse and despair. And a lot of the underlying physiology of all kinds of ritual from all different places, from all different times, have many of the same core components underneath them. There's posture, there's breath work, there's vocalizations, so this would be chants, this would be songs. Yeah, there's dance, there's practices for collective joy. And all of these really, in all of our lineages, we have different packages for them, right? We have different meaning that we've made over time about what these practices mean and what deities we're speaking to and how we describe our origin stories, right? We all have all different cultures throughout time have had different ways of talking about that. But the actual basic nervous system stuff underneath it, the physiology of ritual, is astoundingly similar. And that's because we're all mammals, and basic mammal shit actually works pretty well when it comes to figuring out how to regulate and how to ground and how to essentially stay in our bodies in high states of arousal. That would be high states of fear, high states of uncertainty, similar to the one we find ourselves in right now, right? So, so there's all this, conversation right now, especially in fields where we're talking about the nervous system, where we generalize about human behavior, right? We say things like, oh, humans are just crazy. Like, look what we do when faced with scarcity. We buy all the toilet paper, right? Or, oh, like humans, human brains are inherently wired to be really, really unmoored by uncertainty, for example. Like, these are things we say. And actually, what's actually more accurate is to say that we have architected, that colonialism and capitalism have architected an evolutionary mismatch for our nervous systems. The culture that we have built, driven by the trauma of European heritage people in the transition to capitalism and hundreds of years of brutality and technologies of subjugation, that were so unhealed for so long, they have now been codified into empire and pushed around the globe into the geopolitical context that we find ourselves in right now, right? Where it's, white supremacism, patriarchy, omnicidal capitalism that is the killing of all the things, life being exchangeable for profit.
And so, the fact that we need these practices now more than ever isn't simply because we're all stressed out, right? And that oppression is rampant, right? It's not simply that. It's that there's a really important connection between the way our nervous systems have been co-opted and mechanized by capitalism and by colonialism, and the fact that when we're not grounded, then a lot of shit becomes possible because we're in total overwhelm. This prevents us from organizing. It prevents us from being calm and grounded and seeing the complexity and nuance of our situation. It prevents us from solidarity, often with other folks, because we're in an activated state, which I'll get into around what happens in our nervous systems when we're activated. We actually have like a totally different perception of reality when we're activated. And so it's not a coincidence for me that the very practices we need right now in order to stay grounded, in order to create solidarity and revolution right now, in this opportunity, one of many opportunities. There's always opportunities for revolution, but there's a particularly potent moment right now for transformative, for things to be transformed, because there is so much chaos and because so many people are being impacted all at once at a very material level. People who are often insulated by privilege, by class privilege, by race privilege, by gender privilege, and etc., who are now impacted. So there's a very potent moment we find ourselves in. And so for me, the question isn't just what do we do to ground, what do we do to calm down, but why is it that the very practices we need often we don't have access to? And it's because it's not a coincidence that the very practices we need are the very same practices that were stamped out of us in the transition to capitalism.
Okay. So I'm going to offer two practices today. The first one is a sort of like a quicker in the moment practice when you're having a lot of anxiety and just wanting to ground in the moment and just have a little bit of peace. The second one is more about how to sort of build your own non-appropriative ritual based on, nervous system technologies, also known as ancestral healing ways that most of us have lost touch with. So that's the second one is a little bit more, it takes a little bit more setup. And sometimes when we're just in the moment and we need something quick that will help us just sort of down-regulate just a bit in the moment, that can be helpful. So the first one, you could do this standing or sitting. I'm on my knees here. And so just a position that you're comfortable in where you can breathe. And the first thing is just to deeply bow to our bodies for holding a tremendous amount of anxiety right now. And it's okay if we don't feel particularly safe. It's okay if we feel anxious, right? And so sometimes I find trying to invite my body into relaxation without acknowledging that it makes sense that I'm upset can be a little bit of a moment of not catching myself where I am. So the first part of this simple ritual, this simple practice, is just to notice, not even trying to change what's happening, just noticing the room you're in. And your body might be having a lot of, symptoms and signs telling you it's anxious, heartbeat or feeling like you can't breathe and things like this. But see if you can just relax into noticing the room around you. And this is just a simple kind of orienting our nervous systems to the actual sense of safety that is real for us. And I want to acknowledge that for those of us who are in abusive situations, those of us who are in direct harm in this moment, those of us who don't have a safe place to even watch this video, like this is not going to be the case. But for the folks who are watching this video from a safe place, knowing that you have a little bit of space to watch this in safety, just simply orienting our nervous system to what's true around us can be the first step to just calming a bit. So you're just letting your eyes, you want to sort of let your eyes have a soft focus. So you're not kind of like tight and narrow looking at things, but instead just sort of an open, soft focus. And you just notice, am I in a space that feels, is anything wrong in this moment? Yeah, there might be things you need to think about and things you need to do, and you've lost your job and whatever the things are, right? The real things. But just saying to yourself, in this moment, can I just notice that everything actually is okay in this room right now? And one way of inviting ourselves into a soft orientation like this is to actually use peripheral vision. And this was taught to me by an eye doctor I had, that I have a really intense glasses prescription, and he was showing me essentially how to not strain my eyes so much because I have a trifocal situation. And he shared this practice with me and mentioned that it's actually sometimes used to train athletes to see the full, to essentially pick up more information in a field of play than they normally would by looking and focusing peripherally. And you'll see for yourself, if you follow along with me here, that what it does is it relaxes, it activates polyvagal pathways, if I were to put it in sort of scientific language. It allows us to, the soft focus allows the body to relax. Like you're essentially saying, there's nothing to pay attention to so closely right now, right? So just see if you can be in whatever room you're in, and just use, instead of focusing in front of you, just see if you can focus, notice what's in your peripheral vision. And you don't have to get all tight about, oh, I can't really see it. It's instead just, what do you notice out here? And just calmly sort of noticing, oh, I see a little bit of the bedspread. I can see a bit of the window on my left. And just as you do this for a couple minutes, just noticing what happens in your body as you slip into this this sort of expansive state of reality, which is, supported. It's a nervous system shift that's supported by changing our visual orientation. Yeah, so I notice my heart feels like it's dropping a bit, it's relaxing a bit. It's a sense that I can just sort of be heavy here in this moment, that there's nothing to do. And there's also a companion sense of there being more information than there was before that I'm sensing into. There's lots of information in this field in the room with me. There's all kinds of beings that I sense, that are energies that are in this space that I didn't notice before because I was sort of in a tight visual field. So that's the first practice. The second practice is a little bit more in depth, and it's just something I'll sort of give an outline for here so that y'all can create your own ritual if you want. And this would just, you can use ritual for all kinds of things. In this case, I'm just saying that we can create a ritual for ourselves to put a little bit more shape and intention around any kind of relaxation practice. So what I was mentioning in the first part of the video was that so many of our traditions, our ancestral life ways and healing traditions, have similar components of the way in which we can regulate our nervous systems, right? We talked about bowing. I'll just sort of do that here to explain that there's all kinds of things that happen when we bow. There's all kinds of things that happen when we loosen our spine and get a little bit of mobility in our spine, including sort of bringing up the energy that can get stagnant in our lower body, because that is a place that's just entirely cut off in Western culture. And there's, complex reasons for that around how Christianity has taken root, the way that has impacted our embodiment. Those of us who've come into contact with Christianity, and all of us have, because of the way that has dovetailed with the rise of Western civilization and colonialism and, transporting that worldview all over the globe with violence and oppression. So because of that, it is really important for us to incorporate things that allow us to move our spines and to connect the lower body and the upper body. Bowing and movements like this help our blood pressure regulate, and they also help us. There's at the bottom of the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve sort of ends around what we consider our guts. We might say our guts, our intestines, which many of our traditions, again, speaking of the guts, have different words for this part of the body. A sense that this is a place of wisdom and self-connection. In Japanese culture, this is referred to as hara. In Chinese medicine, we might call it dantian. In Celtic mythology, we might call it the cauldron of warming. There are lots of other words for this part of the body, but this part of the body it's like our second brain. We actually there are multiple brains. We have a pelvic brain and a heart brain and a gut brain and a skull brain. But the gut brain in particular, really sort of mediates and is a barometer for our sense of safety. And so you might notice as you start to do this kind of practice that you might be holding a lot of tension in your belly and also in the pelvis. Though the vagus nerve doesn't go that low, it is indirectly connected to the pudendal nerve and a lot of other nerves that regulate essentially how much of a sense of safety our body has for being open, for being rooted, for being able to take in nourishment from the earth. So again, that's a whole nother video, but suffice it to say that when we do these kinds of rituals, when we create rituals for ourselves, if we're intending to essentially rely on the scaffolding that many of our wisdom traditions have had, we want to incorporate some kind of postural movement. So this could be moving your spine in any way that feels good. It could be dancing. It could be squatting. Essentially just anything to bring movement into your spine. And again, bowing in particular, bringing the upper body over the lower body in this way helps regulate blood pressure and is also a way of down-regulating defensiveness and dominance. Which is it's not a coincidence that bowing is such a part of not only ancestral practices, but also more recent sort of contemplative spiritual traditions, right? Where bowing it's a way of down-regulating defensiveness. In other words, surrendering. In other words, being humble. In other words, giving blessings, which is such a part of how, again, back to our nervous systems, just giving our nervous systems a sense that we are in relationship with the world around us and that we can be grateful and thankful and humble. Okay, so for the first part, setting the container. This will look differently depending on kind of what cultural traditions you have, right? Like the way I greet the directions, for example, north, south, east, west, and center, is going to be different than the way somebody else greets or creates a container. So given that I'm trying to invite folks into creating our own container that is specifically yours, that is non-appropriative. When I say set the container, it's more just a sense of saying, hey, to the space here, I'm going to do a ritual here, and just sort of noticing what feels like it would be a sweet way of tending to create some kind of container, right? You might decide you want to, pour salt in a circle and sit in the salt. Salt is, a representative of earth in some traditions. You might decide you want to just sort of tidy, maybe you want to use some rocks to create a container. So it could be a physical creating of a container, or it could a little bit be more of a psychic sort of like clearing a space for yourself in your room or wherever you are, outside, in front of a tree. You're essentially just creating a little container for yourself to work and to do some healing and some magic. The second part is just grounding and centering. So the practice that I just showed before, where we're using our posture and perhaps bowing, like these are just some examples that we could use for grounding and centering. There's a million ways to do this. There's just sort of standing on the earth and noticing, letting the energy in your body sort of settle and get heavy. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's sort of like just enough that you can feel that you're in your body in order to then do the rest of this practice. So it doesn't have to be perfect. You could just be, wiggling your toes and noticing, okay, I feel my feet, I'm standing on the earth. It doesn't have to be complicated. The third part, acknowledging the land and the indigenous people who have lived on this land. So again, as I've said, this takes some research, takes a little bit of research to figure out whose land you're on. Once you've done that, this part, it's essentially once you've grounded and centered yourself, you're essentially also saying, and I am on land, I am on more earth, I am on another body, I am standing on another body beneath me, and this body has bloodshed associated with it, and this body of the earth beneath us has a story and relationships that have been severed in the process of colonialization, in the process of violence and genocide. And so you're just acknowledging that reality, and it's not a sense of like that you're sort of like doing some sort of prayer for forgiveness or something like this. It's more about just acknowledging what is true and intending your work in this container of ritual to be in service of reweaving yourself back into relationship with your own body, back into relationship with the earth, with the ground, back into calm. And again, in order so that we can do the work of revolution, in order so that we can do the work of collective liberation, so that we can be grounded, and so that we can be contextually positional. We are on this land, and this matters, and this land has been tended by indigenous people. In my case, I'm as I said, I'm in what's called Portland, Oregon, which is, there are Chinookan people, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Multnomah. These are bands of Chinookan people, Cowlitz people, who have tended this land for a very long time, and that may my work today, may my work in this ritual be in service to right return to relationality of this land, and to be stewarded by those who are its custodians and have been. So that's part 3. Part 4 is do some kind of practice, right? And I think a lot of my fellow folks in this offering are offering very specific practices, and these are practices that could happen in the context of ritual as well. the bottom line is that we want to choose something that allows us to essentially be in our body. That's the practice. And we can make rituals really fancy where we try to sort of make a particular kind of action happen, or we set up a container so that we can listen for guidance from our ancestors or whatever. In this case, I'm just saying this is a practice that could just help some relaxation. And so once you've set the container, done a little just enough grounding, and then acknowledged the land and the indigenous people who've tended that land and who do tend to that land, you can just choose essentially what would feel really good right now. And part of this work around reclaiming and demechanizing ourselves from colonialism, from capitalism, is about reclaiming our capacity to actually trust our body's impulses, to be in our animal bodies, to not have to have a top-down sense of like what needs to happen now and how we can control it, but more what is wanting to happen, what is wanting to emerge. So now practices, so as I said before, there's sort of these patterns that we have that are all of our ancestral traditions have around breath work, around posture, around vocalization. So these are just ideas to take into your imagination as you sit in this container you've built for yourself and just saying, what do I need now? You know, and sometimes my impulse is like, oh, I really need to crawl around and act like an animal and hiss. Or it might be, I really just need to lay down and just rest for 10 minutes. That's what my body really wants. Or it might be, oh, I'd really like to sing. I'd really like to sing a song right now. And, you know, the way that the vagal system interacts with the larynx and the heart is such that vibration, humming, singing, especially in lower tones. I mean, you can notice what happens as you go up and down in a song, just a moan or a chant on a syllable. You can just notice that you can move up and down with the vibration to affect different part and relax different parts of your body. So that's one option that might come to you. Breath work, you know, this, you can just start breathing in and breathing out and just sort of noticing. I sometimes have trouble with breath work for whatever reason because it feels like too much counting. And so you can just notice, you know, you can just, on the in-breath, you can imagine taking in nourishment from the earth beneath you. On the out-breath, imagining releasing things that you don't need to carry. You know, you mess around. I think part of what I'm really wanting to invite and what I've been so astounded in my study of different sorts of ancestral healing and nervous system, pairing that on top with the nervous system, it's just this sense that we have so much capacity and so much embodied wisdom of actually how to be with our bodies and how to be in our animal bodies, but we've forgotten, and it's been beaten out of us, and it's been written in trauma on our bodies for a very long time. And so part of the process of reclaiming is remembering and trusting that actually our bodies know how to relax if we can just give them a little bit of permission to do so. And so you might set a timer for this, you know, once you've done the grounding and setting the container and land acknowledgement, you might just set a 10-minute timer and just let yourself be in your body, follow your movements. It might be some days you just want to slowly look around the room, but you're just giving yourself 10 minutes to do some kind of practice that is just for you, that is about nervous system regulation, but it doesn't have to be like kind of boring and icky like that. It can just be, what could you do that would be really pleasurable right now for the next 10 minutes, right? And then the fifth one is just closing the container and having a little bit of gratitude. So that just might be, once your timer goes off, it might be just sort of noticing, how was that? How did that feel? Are there spirits or energies or people or things that you'd like to thank? Do you have a sense that, you know, so it's a little bit of a just sort of like thanking the field, thanking
any ancestors who came to be with you during that process, thanking yourself for giving yourself that time. Just a little bit of gratitude for this gift that you've just given yourself. And just noticing, yeah, you might, sometimes I ask, like, is there anything else this field wants me to know before I close the container? Because essentially when we're relaxing our nervous system like that, we're essentially expanding to take in more information than we have just in our normal waking consciousness. And so sometimes there's more information that can come through in those moments if you just ask for anything that you are meant to receive, or that you need to know. Yeah, and then just closing the container in some way that feels good. That might just be bowing, or it might be, clapping. It might be, in witchcraft, some witchcraft traditions, we might have cast a circle that we would then pull up the circle, so it's some version of that, whatever emerges for you to complete the process. And just really leaning into, creativity and imagination, and remembering that our bodies actually do remember these things, but it's sometimes been a long time. It's been centuries for some of us to have been in contexts where we were in wovenness with land and place and kinship, non-human and human kinship. So I hope that's helpful. I hope to be in touch with anyone. You can follow me below on social media, and I'd love to be in touch with more folks who want to touch and talk about, that'd be nice too, but folks who want to talk about nervous systems and liberation and how important embodiment is to the revolution. Okay, lots of love.